So, how's the mafia doing?
How am I supposed to know?
Well, you're Italian?
As if now every Italian is in the mafia.
Yeah, because not every Italian eats pasta every day.
Ma, can you just please stop with these stereotypes? They're not true. I mean.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Feminist Destroys Feminist. Today I'm going to interview my Italian mortal enemy, and she's going to tell us more about the social and political history and status quo in Italy. We're also going to cover topics such as gender roles, stereotypes, and her master thesis about gender violence that was turned into a book. So, shall we begin?
Sure.
How about we talk about some stereotypes? Are there any Italian stereotypes you're ashamed of?
Oh, well, not really ashamed of, because as we were saying in our last video about stereotypes in Eastern Europe, and I was saying that there were some bad stereotypes. I think that for Italy in general, they aren't as harmful as they could be. Like saying eating pasta and eating pizza every day, I don't think it's really harmful. It can be fun. Maybe it's not true because stereotypes just generalize a situation, but they aren't harmful. Maybe something that I don't really like is when we talk about mafia, but it's not really because it's a stereotype, like you say pasta, pizza, mafia, not really for that, but because I think there is actually an opposite phenomenon, which is more like a glamorization of mafia, like the mafia narrative in movies, in books, and that's something that I don't really like, because it shouldn't be considered as equal as, for example, eating pasta and pizza. That's a criminal organization.
Okay, so when you mention the mafia, I know that it's generally something that people attribute to the south of Italy. So is there a divide between the north and the south in Italy?
Well, yes, there is. It's like more from an historical perspective. We could say a lot about north and south because just from the beginning now we have, like, there is some part of historiography that hasn't really been developed, but like this part of history would consider the south as more like a colony of the north. Like, because all the discourses that the North would make and was making about the South were with a colonizing tone. So, like, we're going to go there and we're going to modernize the country or modernize the villages and towns. And it's like this kind of rescuing mission. And from there, you always had this divide, north and south, where the north was seen as this more powerful and more developed, while the south was actually the opposite. And this is like a mentality that we still have, I would say, or at least I hope that it's stopping with my parents' generation. And with younger generations, so people who are in their 20s, like me, for example, and then even younger, are not thinking about the South in such negative ways. That's probably thanks to social media, maybe, or the fact that we are also traveling more, like even internally in Italy. And so we have the possibility to know more people, different people, and also different realities. So I would say that. And it's true that the mafia thing, it was more something in the South, and it is still a huge problem in the South. But this doesn't mean that it wasn't in the North as well. It's an Italian problem. Maybe it developed and it operates more openly in the South, but it's also present in the North. And also it's infiltrated into political parties as well, and political parties are generally like a national thing. It's not only like something from the south. And so this is also something that should be changing when we talk about north and south.
Okay, I mean, I understand the argument that we should treat people equally, I mean, wherever they're from. But the fact is that I think still the South is still not as developed as the North. So maybe would you say that if there were, like, let's say the government invests more in the South so they can equalize this thing, would this change? And maybe would you actually say that if we stop treating the North as something that's kind of regal and we actually give the South more, do you think this is a better idea than just trying to develop both at the same time and the South at some point will catch up?
Yeah, as I was saying, this is like a historical thing that we'll keep having still today, but like there are different opinions even from a historical perspective on this cultural divide, and also specifically about the fact that the South is less developed than the North.
So it's not true.
That's debatable because, for example, Veneto, which is the region where I come from, where you have cities like Venice and Verona, for example, it should be one of the richest regions. And it's in the north, but for example, in my town, it's really like more countryside, and it's more farmer based as like primary industry, primary sector, rather than.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand what you're saying, but isn't there like another variable here? Because you can compare a town to a city and a village, but what if you compare, let's say, Milano to Napoli?
I don't have the data here to say if it's more developed or not, or also you have to consider different sectors. Maybe Milan is more developed in the fashion industry, or I don't know, this is something that I'm thinking about, while maybe Naples is more developed for tourism. So maybe you can have more business in Milan, you can have more tourism in Naples. These are just things that I'm thinking without having any data here. And also, if we consider it from historiography, there were different branches of thought about this. So some would say, for example, Antonio Gramsci, who was a Marxist, so you also have to consider from a Marxist perspective, he said that the South was underdeveloped. Or if you, for example, consider Francesco Nitti, he would say that Italy, whether it was north or south, it was more or less the same. It was still underdeveloped considered or compared to countries like Great Britain or France that had already had the Industrial Revolution. While for us, we didn't have primary sources like iron or coal, and in that cases, it was a bit slower, the industrialization process. So it's really, that's also something debatable. We really have to go back to the sources. And so from there, I think we always had this South question, the question of the South, and how to improve it. And it would be better, as you said, if we could just improve the country in its whole, north and south, because there are, as I said, some towns that are less developed in the north. They would maybe, if there was more job employment or like some renovation, they would benefit as much as other parts of the south. So just in general, I think it's more nuanced than it is.
So you said there are like differences between the north and the south, basically in how people make money because the sectors are different. So basically, to say it like very simplified, we can basically maximize the sectors that the South is doing a great job at. So maybe this can increase the GDP of that region, or it may be a good strategy. Okay.
And also that's the same for education. I mean, of course we can improve, like there was also this thing saying that the schools or universities in the South aren't as good as the one in the North. So of course that's something that we should work on. But for example, if I think about my high school, and I was studying foreign languages, and I think they could also have done a better job, for example, in foreign languages. So I think we should see it from a broader perspective, from an Italian perspective, because as history tells us, we were starting from a very similar point of start. And then it was, of course, the history, North and South history was different, maybe. There was a different mentality. So that's something that influenced, and that's why I was talking at the beginning about this sort of colonization. We still have this mentality that the South is less developed because of that heritage.
Now we can move on to a topic that I think you will be very competent in. The topic, let's say, is feminism. So, in your opinion, what does feminism mean to an Italian?
It changes from generation to generation, and also to the class, like one belongs to. So if we think about the political class, in general, feminism, it's really not well considered. And this comes...
Can you define feminism? Because feminism nowadays, I think many people talk about it without actually specifying what they mean.
So feminism is a bit hard to define because you have different branches, and it started more as a philosophy, and then it developed into a political movement, into activism. It can change from person to person. For me, feminism has to be intersectional, first of all. And so this means that when we talk about discrimination and inequalities, it has to be considered from a broader perspective. So it's not only something between men and women. We also have to consider race and class and religion. Just to make a practical example, we know that in Italy, for example, but it's not only in Italy, Black women aren't treated in the same way as white women, for example. And white women have, in some cases, more privileges than Black women. And sometimes, even if they are Italian, they were born in Italy, and they have the citizenship, or whether if they don't have the citizenship, but they were still born in Italy, you have some political parties, and not only political parties, but also regular people who don't consider them Italians. So that's also part, for me, of a feminist issue, because you have this citizen privilege, for example, that you can use against a group. And not only talking about Black people, it can be any immigrant or someone born from an immigrant family. And so for me, as I said, it has to be intersectional, and it also has to consider, for example, sexuality matters and gender identity matters. So it's really broad, but the basic definition is that we want equal opportunities in politics, in the economy, and in the society in general for everyone. And so this is my definition. And when we talk about feminism in Italy, I think that it's not really understood and also not well received. Not well received, especially from right-wing parties. And it's not really understood from the left-wing parties, because they try to be more inclusive, but then they fail. While radical right parties are a lot more complicated, I think, because they want to go against what they call gender ideology, and they don't know what it means, because Giorgia Meloni, leader of Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia, is one of the radical right parties that we have, and she said, I honestly don't know what gender ideology is. But in her political manifesto, that was the first sentence, first point. They say, we are for the traditional family and we go against gender ideology. Okay. So they don't know that, but at the same time, and then I conclude, they also try to use the feminist card in some ways, because they know that feminism is more and more current, like a modern concept, and people, especially younger people, are approaching the movement and these concepts. So they also try to use that, because you have, for example, Giorgia Meloni again, who likes to remark that she is a woman. And she is there for women, like she cares about women.
Because she is a woman. Not,
so yes, she's a, so she tries to use that, and it's not only in Italy; it's happening in France as well. Marine Le Pen, she's doing the same. She said she's a feminist who doesn't hate men. This doesn't make any sense, because it could make sense maybe a century ago, when we were really at the beginning of feminism, and even it wasn't totally true. It wasn't totally true, because there were some feminist men who, like, were, for example, Diderot, who was like one of the French philosophers who wrote essays about feminism. So even that, it wasn't true. But you're saying something like this nowadays is really problematic, because it loses the point and the focus of what feminism is trying to do.
I know there was this scandal in Italy about when this singer, Mahmoud, won the Sanremo. And for people who don't know, Mahmoud has an Egyptian heritage. So he doesn't look like stereotypically Italian, obviously. And there was this guy, Matteo Salvini. I'm sure you're a huge fan of him.
Yeah.
When they asked him that, do you know the story? You can tell it if you want.
I know the story, but...
No, because it was very funny. Not really, but it was tragically funny that they asked him, "Are you happy that he won?" He was like, "Yeah, but I would have preferred somebody Italian." I mean, Mahmoud is born in Italy, right? So yes. That's the point. We have to make this division. I completely agree, especially if you're born there. You are obviously Italian. Generally, when we talk about the radical left and the radical right seems to me that we can actually distinguish it. Because first of all, these people look very much the same, especially if we talk about some neo-Nazis. But if we talk about somebody like Salvini, who doesn't necessarily look like a neo-Nazi, when he opens his mouth, you understand what this guy thinks. And this is something that we see in other countries, even the former American president, let's say. But about the radical left, there is, I think, a general problem that when somebody, because generally it's considered that the left people are these that are the intelligent ones, the liberal ones, the ones that care about others. But I think that this distinction between the left that actually cares about others and the radical left, which is something that my country, for example, fell victim to, like the communist things and the influence of the Soviet Union. So do you have this kind of, at least in your political system, let's say, parties that are the ones that actually at least try to care, even though they might make mistakes, or ones that you can definitely see that these people might say, oh, yes, we support feminism, but we are we have completely different intentions?
Yes, I think there is, but unfortunately, I think they don't really have enough votes to have a proper voice in parliament. Like the parties that truly care about, or at least try to care about equality. So there is a party that it's Più Europa, which I think it's the one that goes closest to this, at least trying to care about. But then the majority, I think it's really hypocritical in general. I know it's sad to say, but I'm not saying that all the left is hypocritical and they're they don't do anything, because that's not really true. It was with a left-wing party that we had civil unions for queer couples, which there wasn't before. So that's something that we still have to think about. And it's also from a left-wing party that we tried to promote this bill, the Zan bill, which was proposed last year by Alessandro Zan, a deputy from the PD, so the Democratic Party. And this bill wanted to prevent, in some ways, homo, bi, transphobic actions. And so, to have a law that protects LGBTQ plus people, but it was also women and disabled people or people with disabilities. That's better. And so like against discrimination. And it was rejected by the right, basically. So I'm not saying that left wing is not doing anything. If we have to find someone, it's usually the left wing. But they're also a bit hypocritical because they try to use this for their benefit, basically. So I'm always a bit skeptical.
I would like to ask you something that maybe people generally don't attribute to Italy, because we know that other countries have done it, but I think that you can tell us more about that. Was Italy a colonializing nation at some point?
It was. So we had our colonies, and this is also a part that we usually don't study because we're really good at denying things, especially bad things. We try to forget about them, or tend to forget about them. So this is a problem because even in Italy we don't really study this colonizing past, and so I don't really know from a more external international perspective how Italy is perceived in this colonizing game that was 2 centuries ago. It didn't have the empire that Britain, for example, had, but still we had our colonies, and it was still harmful for the countries where we went to colonize. And also I think it's even worse that we don't actually recognize this part.
That's weird, because I think that generally countries that have had some kind of war victories, some territory gains, that is something that builds up the so-called national spirit, wouldn't you say?
Well, first of all, I'd say that colonization is always bad. I don't see the only benefit is from the colonizer, not the local people. So I don't really care about the colonizer, just against colonialism. I don't know how to say in other words.
Yeah, but from which perspective is it bad? It's bad from today's perspective for a country to go and invade another country. I get that. But what if it's not just it's not colonialism, like we don't go to another continent? But what about wars in Europe between countries?
Of course, even wars aren't good because I don't really see what are the benefits from a war when you have economic and social disruption in general, and this applies for all the parties involved.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Can I give you an example about, let's say, Italian history? Do you think that we would remember the Roman Empire if it wasn't an empire and they didn't have all these wars and they didn't basically make all these developments because they had this unified territory?
Of course, we wouldn't remember the Roman Empire if they didn't go to basically half of Europe and sort of colonize them. Now it's part of the history. And as an historian, as a person who studied history, we don't make history with ifs, but only with facts. So I don't know if the Roman Empire didn't do what they did. I don't know what would have happened, even from an Italian perspective, and let's say Italian development and Italian culture in the world. But since I was born in 1996, I have modern contemporary mentality, and I'm just thinking, would it have been so bad if, for example, the Roman Empire wouldn't have been remembered? This is another question. Do we actually need to remember an empire that went and destroyed the cities and villages and stole from the places where it went? Do we actually need it? Now, of course, it happened. We know the consequences, we have the data, we have the documents, and we just study from there. But if we could change that, do we really need that? And that's the same for colonialism. What was the point?
We're going to talk about it some other time. I'm just going to say for now that, for example, if Columbus didn't go to America, we would never have laptops. So let's move on to the other.
But that's different, I'd say, because he could have gone there
And what?
and
Say hi
take
to them.
say
Okay.
hi, and then come back and say, I said hi to some people over there, and that's one thing. Like just reporting what you discover.
Yeah, but this is from today's perspective.
Yes, as I said, I was born in 1996.
Okay. As any society, let's say, as any country, there are some gender roles involved in them. So would you say that there are some massive differences in Italy? Or is there something different, something that's better in your opinion?
I think it's generally we conform to the stereotype, which is just a general stereotype where the man goes at work and the woman stays at home with kids. It's also true that we're not having many kids at the moment in Italy, but just the woman
That's a
stays
European
at home.
problem, to be honest.
That's an European problem. The interesting thing is that there isn't like a huge gender gap in Italy, or at least in the public sector, it isn't like really huge. In the private one, it's a bit bigger. But that's not anything shocking if you compare it to other European countries. It's more or less average gender gap. The problem is that you have many women, like around half, like 50% of women who stay at home, like they are unemployed. So that's the biggest issue. These are data from Istat. Since 2019 until now, 2021, when they published the last ones, they're still similar. There hasn't been much evolution with that. And so this is one thing, for example, in the economic point of view. We can also see that from the political side, we haven't many women in politics. Like once again, what we were saying earlier, they tried, especially some left parties, they tried to propose a woman, like one woman without a name, without a surname. We wanted a woman as a president of the republic, which was who was elected recently in the past months. But finally, we didn't find a woman, so we had to call our previous president back. But this is another story. So even in that, and then in general, in education, you have more women that usually continue education. And this is also another like European and Western, if we want to say, situation. Usually women are more in the academia than men. But then
depends on the subject.
It depends on the subject, so that's also conforming to gender roles, because you have more men in scientific fields and you have more women in like humanities. But also then if you see at professor, like university professor level, you have more men, and while women are more as in high school or middle school or primary school.
I'm going to try to ask something and put it in an Italian context somehow. You mentioned that a lot of women are still at home, and you think it's a bad thing.
Not really.
Okay, explain it. Do you think it's a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing in general, because if it is a choice that has been made consciously, then I'm totally fine. I was mentioning that like earlier, I was mentioning that around 50% of women are unemployed. I think this, from like more an economic perspective, it could be harmful, because when you're at home and you are unemployed, you have less economic independency. So even if it's a conscious choice, I always want to ask if it is like a conscious and happy choice, or if it also has been dictated by the kind of society in which we live. And also I'd say that from like more a rational perspective, it's totally understandable that if you have like the man, he's the one who earns more in the family, it's natural that the man keeps working and the woman stays at home, because if she has a fewer like a lesser income, if you have to like sacrifice one of the two incomes, you would sacrifice the one that is like smaller. And this is also another problem, and this is the gender pay gap problem, because if we had women and men earning the same amount of money for the same job and same amount of hours, so then maybe we could actually have a discussion who is going to stay at home if there is the necessity that one of the two parents has to stay at home. But if there is this divide, this gap, of course you would choose like the lower one to sacrifice it. I don't know if I'm explaining.
Interestingly, I agree with you on everything. Maybe up until the gender pay gap, because it's very more complex than it. I mean, you're saying that they should earn the same, like this family where the woman and the man earn the same, but they can be in different sectors, they can have different jobs. So yeah, it's different. If again about the gender pay gap, maybe in general, if we can make sure that if you have the same position and this position is really well defined as the same position, that whoever occupies it should get the same money. I'm absolutely on board. So okay, you mentioned violence. That could be one of the potential problems when women stay at home and they are not financially independent. So can you tell us more about your master's thesis? I know that it talks about intergender violence, and it is actually now a book. So
yes, it is a book. It's more about media representation of gender violence. So how media talk about gender violence. One form of gender violence is domestic violence, of course, and so when we talk about gender violence, we're usually referring to violence towards women, because gender, once again, it's a really broad term, and that will require a whole other discussion. But in the popular terminology, we talk about gender violence. It's generally violence towards women. And that's only from a statistical point of view, because generally women are usually the victims or survival of violence. So I don't know what you want to know, like in specific about.
Well,
that.
let's say what you learned from the experience of researching about that book. How does the media represent? Are female victims well represented? Is there a good distinction between what an actual victim is?
Well, no. So actually the point of my thesis and book is that media don't really represent in the most accurate way gender violence, especially from like in the way they use words, not just about domestic violence, but also in general, if we talk about femicide or just abuse, sexual abuse, or other forms like revenge porn. And there are many forms of gender violence, and it can also be physical or psychological. And usually media tend to either to find like motivation or like a reason why the abuser or the perpetrator of violence did what they did. So like trying to find an excuse for the person who is violent. And they try to minimize like the victim or the survival position. So saying, for example, when we were talking about the Me Too movement, which is maybe easier to understand, there was always this question about how was she dressed, for example, or what did she say, or what did she do in order to have that conclusion. So it was never just the perpetrator of violence and that's his fault and that's the one we have to blame. It was always trying to find a nuance where maybe we shouldn't be looking for nuances. Okay. And that's the same even for femicide. With femicide, you have like a victim. There has been a murder. You have a woman that has been killed. And even in that, we try to find excuses for the killer, saying, well, she had a difficult character, difficult behavior to live with. Or, for example, she wanted to find someone else, or she found someone else, so she wanted to quit her current boyfriend or husband and whatever. And then the perpetrator of violence, the killer, etc., had just this moment of rage, and so he reacted. But he was a good person. And we have to remind that he was a good person. And this is a very harmful way to show gender violence, because we always have like a doubt around victims and survivors of violence, while we try to find excuses.
Because you said that they find excuses, and I understand the fact that like these arguments that the women, the way they're dressed, it's a stupid argument. And if we're actually trying to reach society where everybody can do whatever they want, meaning they can be anywhere dressed as whatever, this should not be a tenable argument at all. But generally our legal system is based on intention. So there are different kind of verdicts based on why I did it. So if I kill somebody, let's say, I will have a different verdict if I had an intention, or if it was self-defense, let's say. So how do you make this distinction between whether something is just an excuse because they were this good guy, because the neighbor said that this guy always said hi when he was opening the elevator, and the actual intention that is important for, let's say, a legal system to function, so they can actually attribute a reasonable verdict to the perpetrator?
I think there you have to look at case-by-case situation. Of course, when we talk about femicide, it's not just a woman that has been killed and full stop. If, for example, I am a woman and I owe you money, and you ask this amount of money, and I don't give it back to you, and then one day you're just mad at me and you kill me because I didn't give you the money back. This is not femicide. This is just homicide, because that's money reason, for example. But in another case, if you have a couple, and you have the woman who wants to leave her partner, her boyfriend or husband, for whatever reason, she found someone else, or she's just tired and she wants to leave. And then this man kills her because he cannot just conceive the idea that she can have a life without him or with someone else. This is femicide, because you're killing the woman just because she's a woman, because you think about her as your property, like as your possession. And this is a very ancient patriarchal way of thinking about women, because 2 centuries ago, women were legally the property of men. When men married women, they instantly became like their possession, together with their actual money.
I would say this is an oversimplification, but
that's a simplification, but that's also how it is. Like, of course, society has changed and has developed from that, but we still have this heritage, like this patriarchal heritage, where the man is at the top of the pyramid. And so in some ways you still want to control the woman.
What about cases where women kill their husbands?
That's still like a toxic trait, of course, and it can be for whatever reason, because we also have toxic masculinity that maybe can be also exercised by women. So like women want to keep the gender roles as they are.
That's the only reason why a woman would kill her husband.
No, I'm just saying there can be women that can kill their husband, and it can be for jealousy, as we usually say in the media. But probably, fortunately for men, the statistics aren't that high, so it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There can be many reasons, and one of the reasons can be still patriarchy, because you think about the man in a specific way, and even the woman wants the man to be in that way. And if the man goes like outside his gender roles, then maybe you can have a woman that doesn't accept that and she decides to do this extreme act and murder him.
Okay.
But just the statistics don't give us like a huge number of these cases.
Okay. Before we conclude, I just want to run an idea by you. So because you're saying that there's this kind of patriarchal tradition behind these kind of killings. Let's assume that we have couples that that consist of a man and a woman, and both of them hate each other the same way. But if they get into a fight, we know who most probably will win because of biological differences, physical biological differences. Or you wouldn't agree with that?
I wouldn't agree with that because it really depends on, once again, case by case. Just maybe...
You wouldn't say that the majority, if we have like 100 couples who hate each other the same way right now, and we say kill each other to death, that at least 90% will be men.
Maybe on average, men could be like stronger than women. If we talk about cisgender men and cisgender women, we could say that, but I think it really depends case by case.
No, because the only thing is that I don't think that it's only because of a patriarchal tradition. Because let's say we have a case where they don't like each other and the woman slaps the man, but this is nothing for the man, and the reverse reaction could be a punch in the face, which can be lethal. It's just biologically driven. There is this biological variable that can be problematic in these cases.
But we also saw that there are some women who kill their husband. So this happened because the man beat the woman, and so she just was tired of that, couldn't stand that anymore, and killed them. So if, for example, a man shoots a woman, like his wife, 3 times, let's say, this is something that has nothing to do with strength. It's just a gun.
Yeah, but on average...
shoot the woman 3 times, it's lethal, and that's it. And this can also happen for women as well. Yeah. And so even statistically, we have that generally men beat women more frequently than the other way around. So we can say that this is like a biological fact, but I mean, why women don't beat men like the same, even if the effect is not the same. Like I slap you, but it doesn't hurt as much as it could be if you did the same to me.
Well, I think it has something to do with physical superiority, because mostly women don't think that they can beat their husbands in a fight.
I don't think it's because of that.
I'm not saying it's because of that. I'm saying that there are various variables, and it's not just like a patriarchal tradition. But yeah, I just want to remind our viewers that the book is actually about the Italian media, so that's why we're talking about this thing here. But yeah, it might develop into a discussion because I see that both sides have things to say. So before we actually conclude, I would just like to ask you this. What do you want to see in Italy happening in the next 10 years?
I hope we can talk about feminism, inequalities, gender violence, any kind of discrimination with the right terms. And some people are already starting to do that, so I just hope that this continues. And that's the same for gender roles. I hope that some days we don't have to talk about gender roles anymore, and that's not only for Italy, that's just a general idea and hope that I have. About Italy in specific, I hope that this North and South divide will finally find its conclusion. I don't know if it will ever be the case, considering our history, but I just hope younger generations are doing much better. There aren't these derogatory terms towards the South specifically that I can hear that are used by younger people. So I just hope that this more understanding and mindfulness continues to grow and develop.
Okay. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode and see you next time.